All
Oh
right.
yeah, hello, hey, okay, all right, people are around. Okay, you can hear so much. Okay, so
Check, check, check.
if that is a if that is a volume thing, I'm sure that's something Jason can handle. I mean, I can because I'm not streaming this particular panel, but anyways, hey everyone, how are you doing? You are still watching IndiE3 2014. Oh, okay, all right, okay, perfect. I'm just looking at stuff, make sure everything's okay. Perfect. So you're still watching IndiE3 2014. We have a panel again with Frank and Alex. If you remember them from the panel on designing with zero budget, here they're actually going to talk about streamlining your game design, and I'm just going to let them go. This is probably going to be a very short panel because TJ can't be around, unfortunately. So I probably have to short this one from regular 5 minutes to about 30 minutes at least, is what you said, Frank. So probably, yeah. So okay, that's totally cool. So what I'll do is I'll come back around 30 and I'll see how you guys are doing. But yeah, I'll let you guys take over.
Sounds
Okay,
good. Thanks, man.
great. So me and Alex, from our panel, for those of you guys who weren't at our panel on Tuesday, Alex and I used to work together at Harmonix, and now we're both separately doing our own indie projects. And Alex is currently on his second indie project. His first one is published on Steam, and I'm currently on midway through my first indie project. It's about been a year in development. And both of us has had a bunch of experiences with thinking that a feature is really cool, and then for whatever reason, it just coming down to the wire and being like, you know what, that's something that we have to cut. So this whole panel is going to be about the original, proposed title I came up with was "Killing Your Design Babies," because they say that the worst thing that you can have in design is come up with a baby that you want to protect and that you want to make immune to feedback, because sometimes you just got to face a reality that something that you think is cool in your head is just not working out. It's not getting communicated properly to the player, and it should be cut. And so, yeah, Alex, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you've had to cut through Dark Scavenger, and I'll then follow up with a story about my own shenanigans with Blood Alloy.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with a big one, actually. So Dark Scavenger, for those of you not familiar with the game, which is probably all of you, let's be honest, Dark Scavenger is a very weird kind of point-and-click adventure game, and so you kind of move through what are called chapters. There's Chapter 1 through Chapter 5, and basically I had real big plans for this game. Actually, wow, now that I'm talking about it, I got a lot more than I thought. Okay, so originally this game was going to take place over 5 planets, like 5 entire planets, full of characters and dialogue and interactions and big final boss fights and all these different items you collect, but about halfway through the first chapter, quote-unquote, of the first planet, we realized, what are we thinking? That is impossible. That is an absolutely absurd goal. So we immediately reduced it from 5 planets to 1 planet, and even that took us exactly 2 years of development. So that's kind of the, that's kind of, I guess, cutting or killing your babies in a nutshell, so to speak. But I guess on a more micro scale, so to speak, one big thing that happened was Chapter 5. This game was a real struggle for us to make, by the way. You might play it and you might look at it and you might be like, how come this took them so long to make? There's no animation. It's all 2D art. But in reality, it was really difficult to pull that game together. There were a lot of unique assets required, and a lot of writing was required. And ideally, the game was going to continue to escalate and increase in intensity. And you get to Chapter 5, and Chapter 5 is this like really big, epic confrontation with all these bosses you found before, and everything kind of wraps up together, and there's this huge kind of climax at the end of the game. But what we found ourselves very short on resources. We found ourselves in a real bad place near the end of this game. We had artists who weren't participating in the project anymore. Code was fatigued, and design, myself, was completely fatigued. And even though I was attached to the idea of this really big, epic area, we had to make a real harsh choice. We decided to take all the resources that we had allocated for this big final grand chapter of the game and cut it all and put all the resources that we were already struggling to put together directly into the final boss fight itself. and make Chapter 5 as short and succinct as possible. In fact, we had to cut an entire boss fight from Chapter 5. There was this big final confrontation with this enemy who you'd been meeting over and over again through the whole game. And we were supposed to have this big confrontation, but one of our artists, for example, who was assigned to it, ended up not working with us anymore. And because of that, we didn't have all the art required for that boss fight. So I had to rework the entire boss fight to basically make this. I had to turn this bad guy into a good guy to redeem himself at the end, so the player didn't have to fight him. But ultimately, all these changes sound really drastic. They sound really harsh. It sounds like it would have affected the quality of the game. But what in reality ended up happening was the game actually was better for it because of these constraints, because of this real harshness to it than what we had to work with. We ended up actually helping the pace of the game, because the game had been building and building and building, and since we kind of rushed to the end, so to speak, in a usually rush has a bad annotation to it or connotation to it, but since we kind of focused the end, I think is the better word, we ended up actually creating a really succinct and powerful finale. And this one character that I mentioned that was supposed to have the boss fight, what we were finding is players actually ended up liking this character by the end and didn't want to see this character horribly mutilated by the player. So that ended up working out too. So ultimately, as attached as I was to this big final area of the game, because of reality and because of these real constraints that came up, our game ultimately benefited from it. So yeah, I guess the moral of my particular story in this case is, open your mind to the possibility that, if you have to cut something, it might actually be for the best. You might actually better yourself from it. The more from restraint comes creativity and innovation, and you can utilize that to make your game go in a direction that you never could have thought it could have gone in before, and make it that much more effective. That's my spiel. To you, Frank.
Yeah, I think there are two things that this makes me think of. One, I think it's true for any creative art. In Mass Effect 2, Mordin Solus, the Solarian scientist, says, he comments that restrictions, deadlines, etc. force you to make hard choices, and it forces innovation, and it forces you to look at what's actually important, because ultimately at the end of the day, you can have like an okay 8-hour experience, but look how short Portal was. What, 3 hours, 4 hours max, and it was the most beloved game of the next like 5 years. It like anything that's, and this also goes to another quote. Your portfolio is only as strong as your weakest piece, and I think that's true for games too. Your game, for the most part, is really only as strong as the weakest elements. If you have a lot of kind of ho-hum filler that's just clogging up your game, and then you have maybe 2 or 3 cool moments, really you might be better off than making just like a Ludum Dare game that has like a couple really cool moments, and you might see, just from a fiscal standpoint, you might be better off selling that like a 5-minute game that has some really cool, interesting stuff, and sell that on itch.io for a couple bucks than trying to make like a 3-4 hour game that's mostly humdrum. There's that, and from the AAA perspective, you want to look at what happened to Duke Nukem Forever. It was stuck in development hell, not because bad teams or poor resources or whatever. It's because they had too much resources. That the leadership had so much money from the success of Duke Nukem 3D, that any time a new game came out, they were like, oh, they did something new, we have to have that in there, and it just made the development cycle just stretch on forever, and the resulting game was just a pretty terrible mess. Arguably, some people will argue whether it was still a mess after Gearbox came in and actually fixed up and published it, but that's neither here nor there. The idea is you want to focus on what's actually crucially important to your game. For Blood Alloy, actually started off as it's Blood Alloy, for those who don't know, is a 2D platform shooter, And it started out as a design portfolio piece. I thought it would be cool. It's like, okay, I need to learn how to teach myself to program, and so I'm going to build a 2D combat system, kind of like Dust and Elysian Tale. I was like, okay, let me try to build that, and then lo and behold, 2 weeks in, I'm like, you know what, shooting is a lot easier than handling dozens of combat animations. So it then became a shooting game. And then what happened there, my big epiphany almost a year ago was, I'm a huge Dark Souls and Demon Souls fan, and I was thinking about the stamina mechanic in those games. I really love how the interplay between blocking, attacking, and dodging are all regulated by the stamina meter, and that 1 meter regulates the moment-to-moment tension. And I was like, oh, what if I can take this and I can modify this to 2D gunplay? And I kind of ran that idea off of a bunch of people, and just out of that kind of elevator pitch, take Dark Souls stamina mechanic and apply it to 2D gunplay. People understood it. It was great. It was like, oh, that's really interesting. Cool. All right. And that's what we developed with for about 6 to 8 months. And it was just not working in practice. I had dodge abilities, various weapons. I had an energy shield, and it was not. It was acceptable. It was fine. It was moderately fine just to run around and kill enemies, but it really was not anything to write home about. And it kind of interestingly enough, I also am a huge fan of Vanquish, and I love the ability of boosting along on the ground while you're able to freely aim in any direction. And that was one of the abilities that we had. And I was kind of struggling with this because when you're boosting along at that high velocity, and Vanquish solves this by letting you literally slow down time, but I didn't have a time dilation mechanic. It becomes impossible to hit anything, and so I wound up taking a build to GDC, and I managed to track down Rami Ismail, co-founder of Vlambeer, and he played the game, and his resulting feedback completely changed the last 5-6 months of our development. And it was just a simple question. He asked me, "What is your game about? Is it about moving fast, or is it about shooting?" And because I liked that Vanquish boost mechanic so much, I kind of just went with, well, it's about doing both at the same time, because that's what I really wanted to be the case. And he said, well, right now your game mechanics don't support that at all. Right now it's advantageous to move really fast and then stop moving entirely and then shoot. And that's the only way you can hit anything. You have what the encouraging thing he told me is you have the game you're describing to me. I want to play it. It hasn't been done before in this space, but you have the puzzle pieces there to make that game. You just need to retweak things, and so that meant that was huge for us, because I had just kind of been stubbornly sticking to this Dark Souls stamina mechanic, just because that was what the game was from my original conception. And I was like, there was no way we can sell the game, because that was my hook, my pitch for this entire game's functionality. And it was just something that I had to let go, and I was partially able to do that to Alex Gold right here, because Alex Gold pointed out to me, hey, it's cool to boost on the ground, but why not boost on walls and ceilings as well? And I was like, OMG, that is brilliant. And so I completely retuned the entire gameplay. And so what now you can see in our latest game trailers, when I pass the mic back to Alex, so to speak, I'll link the mods, the game trailers, so you guys can just look at it. So you can see this in our game trailers, that you can now boost on all surfaces. Boost on the ground, you can boost up a wall, and then to boost on a ceiling, your character will whip out a sword, jam it into the ceiling to attach yourself to it, and then use her jetpack to flare across while you can still dynamically aim. There's that, and I implemented a mechanic akin to Mario Kart. You know, when Mario Kart, you're making a real tough turn, you can like skid, and then your smoke turns black, and you like charge up a little boost, then you release, and then you have a little boost. So whenever you're boosting in Blood Alloy, if you refrain from shooting just for like a second and a half, you charge up a homing blast. And so that's a huge incentive to boost everywhere and stay mobile, however much you can, and it completely changed the feel of the game. You know, I also originally pitched the game as a Metroidvania, and I still want to have a persistent world with lots of explorations, but it's definitely not going to have that slow, methodic Metroidvania pace anymore because the combat is working up to be so fast. Anyway, so I'm rambling. So the ultimate lesson of all of this is figure out in your game what is actually fun. What is like you might have your idea, but in developing your idea, developing your central pitch, you may come across a feature that actually is a ton more fun and a ton more rewarding. And this, what Alex Gold spoke of, and what I'm speaking of, is that sometimes you have to have the cojones, or to have an incredibly successful indie developer to just outright tell you that you should abandon your original pitch, no matter how like precious it was to you. That you may have something much more rewarding on the immediate horizon that you just need to start developing. And yeah, so Alex, do you have anything to talk about that you can talk about obliquely with your current game that you're developing?
I could. I've actually, we've talked about this before, but I have the absolute most backward story of all time with my current game that I'm developing, which is almost contrary to the entire point of this talk, which is indeed keeping it simple and cutting what you have to get it done. But sure, why not? I'm going to try to keep at least a little bit of this vague, because we have not announced our new game yet at all, and this might be a bigger one for us. But anyway, so essentially, I can say this much. In the beginning, we were creating, I guess, what would be called a musical kind of platformer, like a musical action platformer, I think would be the best way of possibly saying it. And after Dark Scavenger, we learned a whole lot, in fact, about keeping it simple and cutting excess features and anything that's going to overcomplicate the game in terms of design or code or art. And that is what our plan was. We created a really concise design, something that could be completed in 6 months. We already had a really experienced team, and we went forward with this design. And development for a time was flawless. We were cruising through it. We had absolutely zero issues. And then, about halfway through development, we're feature complete. And about halfway through development, I can't say exactly what it was, but something happened that basically caused us to forfeit our entire design. Like everything. All we had left, because we had a musical platformer before, and we could no longer have that feature. To spare you the details, it was some very strange political stuff that involved other things. I'm sorry, I gotta be vague about this, but let's just say high level. Something happened that caused us to forfeit our design. So anyway, we were in a bad state. We basically had nothing. After 6 months of work, we were at square one. And me and my coder Joe, or me and Joe who worked together on this, we are never ever stressed about anything when we work together. And this was the first time, and I think either of or ever that we ever had some sort of issue. We were in dire straits, and we were sitting there for weeks and weeks trying to figure out, what are we going to do? We've got this entire working thing. Are we going to have to scrap this and just move on to another project? Was everything for naught? So anyway, what happened was I was walking home from work for my day job, and I suddenly had this idea to turn this simple puzzle platformer, simple puzzle platformer into a Metroidvania, which is the exact opposite of what you're ever supposed to do. We went from we went from having this incredibly simple puzzle platformer that was totally doable to this gigantic, expansive, diverse Metroidvania that is honestly taking us double, if not triple, the development time. So that is, don't ever do what we just did, by the way. But that being said, as a result of this, once again, to end this little ramble with a positive outcome as well, what ultimately happened is we are, actually, before I continue with that train of thought, if you actually think back to the original Half-Life for a second, there was a very similar thing that happened where Half-Life actually finished, Half-Life 1 actually finished development, and then Valve looked at it, they're like, this isn't good enough. So they went back and they basically started from scratch, and the developers were apprehensive, but at the same time they knew they were creating a better product, and the same thing basically happened to us. The instant that we changed our approach to the game, it became 100, 200% better than it ever would have been before. And not only that, but a couple months down the road, another game comes out. Oh man, I wish I could remember the name of it. I think it's 108. It's a musical platformer involving like a square, and there's like these, like, all the hazards are timed to music. I know that's probably not narrowing it down. It's not Bit Trip. It's another game. It's a great game, by the way. But we found out that game was almost our exact concept. So what I'm trying to say is embrace change and see where it takes you, because these things just, they just work out sometimes, I guess you could say. And, it might take you in a new and exciting direction.
Yeah, and
Frank?
Sorry. Hold on. I lost my mic. Yeah, and going on this, going on this is you have to keep in mind a studio like Vlambier's success. Like, granted, JW himself is a flipping genius, but he's gotten to be a genius because both him and Rami have collectively made literally hundreds of game prototypes, and each of their game prototypes, doesn't take anything more than 2 or 3 days to work on. And what they try to focus on is getting a central, satisfying mechanic. And especially for a lot of us, some of the people in this chat and some of the people hosting this have, dozens of games released, but I've been in AAA for 5 years, and I'm still on number 1 indie game released. And this was a lesson that I wish someone had told me earlier. So, focusing on one central satisfying mechanic, I think, is absolutely key when we're working when we're working in this space. Like, for some people, that mechanic can be like, textual in terms of relationships or storytelling, and that's why people make Twan games, etc. But think about Luftrausers, which had a 2-year development cycle and was profitable within 3 days. Granted, Vlambeer has a name now; they're very well known. But centrally, the game is really, really amazing, and its amazingness comes with its simplicity. Like the notion that you want fire, but if you want to recharge your health, you have to stop firing. Like, I cannot think of another game that's done that, and it's so simple. It's instantly understandable, and they've tuned every aspect of the gameplay to make that like a huge risk-reward scenario. There's Vlambeer, Ridiculous Fishing. Again, incredibly simple gameplay. Avoid the things going down until you hit something, and then hit as many of the things going up, and then hit the things with your finger on your phone. Like, incredibly, incredibly simple, but super compelling. Made the guys millionaires over the course of like several weeks. Well, I mean, not millionaires, but like they made the company incredibly successful. So yeah, my friend Josh, we like to talk about like quote unquote perfect games, and what we mean by perfect games is not games that are like IGN or Destructoid 10 out of 10. We're talking about like the most simple expressions of games, and these games, and personally I considered like Tetris to be a perfect game. Snake I like really consider like it's immediately understandable, and its simplicity is part of its beauty. I consider Snake to be a perfect game. The most recent perfect game that I think that I've played is actually I just downloaded it a couple days ago finally. Threes. Threes is an incredible game in its simplicity, and Threes is actually kind of interesting because it had a very long, kind of agonizing development cycle where they had to keep cutting. They had the game started off with a very strong monster aesthetic. Like instead of numbers, they had like little drawn monsters that you had to find and pair up, but it was just so visually confusing that it took them until like the last like 2 or 3 months of development to finally just settle on numbers. And you can see at the bottom of each little number there's like little tiny like slivers of faces there. That's the only remnants of that monster mechanic that they have left. But the result is like an extremely clean interface, and really just brilliant game design. And so yeah, I urge everyone like just find a mechanic and do everything you can to express that mechanic really well. You can do and actually to help that come out. There are 2 talks that I recommend everyone to see while I talk. I'm going to be looking them up on YouTube, and I'm going to request the mods to post them here. It's Vlambier's Art of Screen Shake, which is about a 45-minute talk. It's incredible, and JW goes through and talks through I think about 30 or so features that you can that any game involving guns that are super like relatively small to implement features, but cumulatively they change a game from being like a very ho-hum student kind of made game to like something that feels super visceral and satisfying. Things like, as I said, screen shake, enemies with low health, tons of enemies, limiting, making sure that your gun, when you shoot it, it doesn't have perfect accuracy, just giving like a little bit of randomness to the bullet angle. Helps stuff like that. Like when all those things compound, it makes the difference of something that essentially still has a very similar mechanic, but you've implemented so many tiny features that now that mechanic has a chance to really shine through and make it feel good. Because like, yeah, there's a difference between something like cognitively and intelligently like feeling good, like, oh, I checkmated that guy, haha, versus like, I remember in the Apple IIe days as a kid, I loved playing battle chess because when I checkmated my brother, I just didn't knock a piece over. My castle literally became like a golem and smashed his king and devoured him alive. It was amazing. And so yeah, think about ways that you can implement those features into your games. So yeah, actually, so yeah, I'd say there are 2 levels of this. As to what we've been speaking the whole time is simple, brutally simple game design, but also enabling that simple game design to feel good, which is polishing your game. Alex, I think you have a story about just adding a little bit of shake to Dark Scavenger, and that kind of changed your whole battle system. You want to tell everyone about that?
Yeah, sure. And actually, one quick note on that as well is if you really are looking to see good examples of what Frank is talking about, of games that really just take one centralized mechanic and make the most of it, play anything by Treasure. Treasure they are honestly like a godly company. Treasure basically finds one simple mechanic and doesn't change the mechanic through the game, but changes the way the player utilizes the mechanic by adding variety to the environment and the variation of enemies that appear to challenge that mechanic. If you want to see a company with their games basically take one thing and carry it for 8 to 10 hours of gameplay, just play anything by Treasure. Mischief Makers, Dynamite Heady, Ikaruga, obviously. I'm just trying to think. There's one big one that's escaping me at the moment. Anyway, just look up Treasure.
Gunstar Heroes, right?
Okay, that's a pretty big one, I'd say. Yeah, just play anything by them. But yeah, so yeah, Frank, on the note, as you were saying, so Dark Scavenger actually has something really interesting. Dark Scavenger, it might be a point and click, but it actually has turn-based kind of RPG, Final Fantasy VI-like encounters. And during these encounters, when we first implemented them, it was a bit, it was a little weak, I think is the best way to possibly put that. You basically entered your command, so to speak. You chose an item to attack the enemy with. You saw some text appear on screen, and then a message appeared that said, "Good job, you hit the enemy, doing this much damage." And that was about it. And it wasn't particularly satisfying, wasn't particularly engaging or enjoyable. Yeah, enjoyable is the word I was trying to say there. So, but that being said, one day, Jim was just like, hey, our coder, Jim Oderman, is just like, hey, let's just add some screen shake to this, or just let's add some shake on this enemy. And we're like, yeah, okay, let's go for it. And so now we just added a little bit of shake on an enemy when you do damage, and suddenly it brought the game to life. It was amazing. The screen shake, in addition to the sound effect, just suddenly made every impact with an enemy meaningful and purposeful, and you felt it. When you attack your enemy with this cruddy old sword, it feels now like you're attacking the enemy with the sword, even though all you're doing, obviously, is just pointing on the enemy and then clicking on him to execute the attack. It is amazing what a difference just a little bit of proper feedback, audio and visual, can add. It will take your game to another level. Yeah, definitely watch those talks that Frank and the mods are posting. They are very powerful and will really get you thinking.
Going with this, I'm requesting that the mods post the trailer for Aces Wild. It's an indie game. The guy's name is escaping me right now. I know his Twitter is Cass_Kicks. I'm going to verify that because he's an awesome guy and he's worth following. But from Aces Wild, you can see Tyler Doak. Cass_Kicks. Cass_Hicks. Cass_Kicks. There we go. If you watch the trailer for Aces Wild, it's just a minute and a half, and you will see more juicy feedback in that minute and a half than I think I've seen in most AAA games like all year. It's ridiculous what he does with crazy animations and hit sparks. Hit sparks refer to the animated little spark animation, say in Street Fighter or something, when you make a physical impact of something. And this is actually something that we're working right now in Blood Alloy. We don't have it yet in Blood Alloy, and my artists are currently working on it because it completely changes the feel of any melee or impact-based combat. If you have, like, say, a frame of a golf, if you have an animation of a golfer taking a golf swing, and then on one frame you have him winding up, and then on the very next frame you have you show him following through. Like, you just goes from the wind up to the follow through. You don't show anything in between, but you just draw an arc showing the path of the golf club head. And at the very bottom, close to his feet, you just draw a little tiny spark where it connected the ball, and you show that animation to people. People be like, "Oh yeah, I saw it hit the ball. I saw it." That hit spark is so it's so subtle and so important. I'll say I think Alex, I don't know about you, but I think I'd like to close off my bit of the talk with a citation of my three favorite juicing features that I've implemented in the game, and that's one, screen shake, obviously, because my game has a lot of guns and a lot of explosions, and screen shake changes everything. So screen shake, hit pause. Hit pausing is huge. There's some great articles online about proper use of hit pausing, and this refers to you'll see this in some of the, I think, Street Fighter 3. That when you land a particularly strong punch, it actually literally pauses the game for a split second, and that it doesn't feel it may not seem like much when you're actually programming it in, but it has such a huge impact on the feeling of gameplay, because just for a split second your eyeballs have and your brain has that much powerful to perceive, like, oh man, there was a hit, there's an impact here, I can see like the dynamic pose and the animation. And I'll tie this into my last favorite feature, is the hit spark. Don't pause the hit spark on the hit pause. Let the hit spark animate throughout the hit pause, and that will again highlight the impact of anything that's impact or melee focused. Alex, seems like one of your features might, again, if you're doing an RPG, just adding a little bit of shake. You have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I can give another one that's probably lesser covered. It's actually really excellent. So I work at a company during the day. I actually work at another game development company called Other Ocean Interactive, which is a great company based out of Newfoundland, which is the easternmost part of North America, I think. But anyway, so we actually developed a mobile title that maybe some of you have heard of called NBA Rush. It's basically Space Jam the Runner, I guess, is the easiest way to sum that one up. And one thing that we ended up doing on the title is, so basically there's these creatures that you jump off, these aliens that kind of roll across the ground, and what you do is you jump off of them and they explode beneath you and they boost you up to higher ledges. It's kind of an infinite runner, right? It's kind of a Subway Surfers-ish kind of deal. So you jump off them and they boost you up to a higher platform. So already we had the screen shake implemented, we had the sparks implemented. We didn't do much of the hit pause, but we already had a bunch of kind of juice or feedback that really made it a lot stronger of an impact than it would have had it just been the player jumping on these enemies. But one thing that we added, which really took it to another level, and this is, of course, if you want to go towards the extreme end of things, is when you jump on one of these guys in succession, in addition to having like kind of a combo meter, we added voiceover, which is hysterical. Voiceover, obviously, that's another topic entirely. That's another can of worms. If you overuse it, it becomes repetitive, so you want to be careful of that. But what we did for this title, which worked, is we had these kind of generic catchphrases, so to speak. So every single time you boost it up, you would basically hear a catchphrase at the end of your combo to represent how important the combo was. For example, I'm not sure if I'm going to make any of the funny voices on the stream, but you get like a 3 combo, for example, and it says All Star. I just made the voice. Or if you get like a 5 combo, it says In Your Face, and it's hilarious every time you hear it, and it adds so much to the impact, so much satisfaction. Like when you get that, the feedback in this case is almost part of the reward. It's not just the extra points, it's not the coins that it gives you. It's actually something that players strive for because they want to hear it, because they want to experience again. Again.
I think that's perfect. That's the whole reason everyone loves the Halo announcer, like Killtacular. Like they don't care like getting Killtacular is great, but you like the fact that you got the Halo announcer to be like Kill Awesome or whatever is the huge part of that value.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, like a lot of fighting games do this. In fact, Parlock just brought it up. Devil May Cry. That's actually exactly the inspiration. In fact, there was another Killer Instinct, of course. Combo breaker. That kind of thing. I love making that sound on live stream. Anyway, that for example is it's that kind of audio visceral feedback that really makes it stronger. Actually, on the current project we're working on at work at Other Ocean, Rad Boarding, which is another game for iOS. So basically, what happens in this title is what I've been talking. So I do a lot of the audio work, so to speak, on this one. I don't actually produce the audio, but I work very closely with our audio designer to find the best way to reward the player for their actions in game. Basically, a lot of that, we came up with this term that I think is just really excellent, which is audio dopamine. Basically, the feedback sound effect has to sound so good that you want to accomplish this action in game just to hear the audio effect again. We use this for when you're leveling up, for example. We use this for when you accomplish like a certain thing in game, like you hear this quote-unquote audio dopamine sample, and that is part of what actually drives the player to perform these actions, not just for the intrinsic values built into the game system itself, but also just for the raw experience of hearing this sound effect and this to accompany the action. So it's amazing how far a little feedback can take you. That's exactly Mario Coins is another great example. Yeah.
I'm just going to note that you are at 45 right now. So you did it a little further than you expected. So if you'd like to conclude or you have anything else to say, you should let people know.
I think I've run to the end of any quote unquote wisdom I have. If there's any questions in the chat, I'd be happy to try to address them, and if not, we can wrap up a little early.
Yeah, either way for me. Yeah, I will tell you that from what I've seen, learning to this is kind of getting back to the original point of the entire session, but learning to quote unquote kill your design babies, so to speak, is one of the hardest things. The hardest things that you possibly have to get over as a designer, but it's also one of the most important things. You can't ever get too attached to anything. You have to be willing to let go. One of my also at work on a game I can't disclose at the moment. I was working on this. There was a plan to adjust a certain feature in a game, for example, and basically I had come up with this big plan. It took me 2 days, and it was this huge plan to totally fix this one feature and adjust it and do all this with it. And I'd been working on this for days, right? Like, you'd think I'd be really attached to this. The next day, I run this by another designer at work. He's like, "Oh, well, that doesn't work because of that." And I'm like, "Oh, God, you're right." And I scrapped the entire thing, and we started over and came up with something that much better. But if I had been attached to this thing, 2 days of work, keep in mind, if I had been attached to this thing, we may have not gotten to this good place that we needed to be. So adaptability and just being ready to change and not being too attached to anything, that's probably one of the most important takeaways you can possibly have, one of the most important lessons you can possibly learn as a designer, and one of the hardest to learn.
Yep. I think that's a really good quote to end on. I shan't say anything stupid to dilute that.
Well,
Zalali, you want to take us out?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for watching. Today is Thursday, if I'm correct, and what that means is that we have actually a little break before we're actually going to do part 2 of our RPG Maker Showcase with our review Unique. So that's going to be really cool. You want to check that out? It is almost 7 o'clock now, so that's going to be 8 o'clock EST. I assume that is 765 o'clock PST. So you want to be there, but right now we're going to conclude the session. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Alex, again. Dispensing really, really insightful stuff. And that is it for now, and we'll see you next time.
All right, guys. Thank you for dropping by. Take care.
Thanks for
Yep,
having
see
us.
ya.